Claude Code is one of the most powerful AI tools out there today. But for non-technical users, it can be overwhelming to set up.
Let me show you one low friction, high impact use case for product managers that are not technical. I'll show you how to use Claude Code within the Anthropic desktop app.
So this is the normal desktop app.
And the use case I want to show you is essentially just to create
Linear tickets, whatever product management system you have will work the same, but
it's a different connector, right? So to use Claude Code in plan mode to create tickets that either you can hand off to an agent to implement or an engineer can take over to implement locally using Claude Code or just writing code by hand, right?
And what we're going to use for that is plan mode,
access to a GitHub repository, and the linear MCP.
How to set up all of them right now. All right. So in the settings here, you will be able to find connectors, and
here you will connect linear. It will just walk you through OAuth to connect to whatever team you're using. For me, this will be Nishmit within the linear web application. All right, now you'll see linear being configured, and then we'll go into Claude Code.
We'll use local mode here,
which will let enter plan mode, which is what we want to do, right? Like we don't want to start writing code. We just want to plan to then turn it into a ticket.
What is the purpose of this project?
Let's see what even is in here so that we get an idea about a feature we could potentially develop.
So what I did when I set this up is I selected the path to the local copy
of the project repository,
where this Git repository that I was showing is basically located
on my computer. So you'll need to clone it and then point to it, because
for some reason they decided in Claude mode you cannot use plan mode. I don't know why, but a lot of question marks with Anthropic these days. So
all right, so this is our AI market research tool called Gutsy.
And what we're gonna do is gonna mock adding in a feature so that plan mode makes sense, right?
It's just gonna be medium to high complexity feature. Otherwise, you don't necessarily need to go through plan mode, even though it's recommended. And especially for you, if you're not technical, if you're not making those changes, might still want to use it, but ultimately you might as well also just write the ticket by hand if it's a very simple bug fix or something, right? So that's up to you.
All right. So
up here, we have this kind of quick actions section, which is essentially the 3 last study types you have used in our tool. And then down here, there's some other CTAs, but instead of this just opening a chat, I want to be able to chat here directly with those tools so that essentially I don't even have to go into the history here. Bit of a made up feature. I didn't really have an idea, so I was just thinking about what would make sense, but let's do that just as a showcase. So we'll go back to Claude, and then usually what I use will be something like Super Whisper, or I use Monologue from Every just to get some information here. All right, and in the quick actions in the dashboard, we have 3 buttons for our last 3 studies that have been run. Right now for me, it says hook testing, focus group, name testing. Let's, instead of opening the chat when pressing those, just have an embedded chat box that lets us call them similar to how we call them within chat with the slash command, without having to leave the dashboard for any sort of quick interaction that we want to have there. All right, so this will give us a rough plan. If you need to look at, or if you want more control, there's also the CLI here that you can open. But then again, if you're not that technical, maybe just start here for now. I think the only downside for me with the web app is that you can't really open multiple ones at the same time. So they all let you. So usually I will be using Claude Code within the terminal. This is a good start in order to start using it without much upfront friction. And once you see a lot of value, it's always possible, of course, to then set it up or get it set up by a developer. Another good thing here, if you're not technical though, is that it will always open rewrite changes in pull requests. So there's less possibility that you will mess something up by changing something and then straight throwing that into master if you don't necessarily know. So that will straight go onto production, which is obviously not what you want. And so here it's a bit more of a sandbox. So what it will do now is it will do a very thorough analysis of files, exploring the things that I mentioned and the things we talked about. Look at some files specifically. You can also show the tool outputs, what exactly it's doing, which lines, which files, etc. And then it will create a plan. Usually this will take quite long. Also with this new opus, it's essentially has longer thinking, extended thinking phases. So
can take quite a while, which is again why I like it better multiple ones at the same time, because otherwise I'm kind of stuck here. Or, you know, go make a coffee and come back to it.
All right, so now that the research is done, we'll ask us a couple questions. Oftentimes these I found to be very useful just in order to get the UX right, whatever you have imagined or envisioned, but you haven't explicitly told it, right? So that's why it's asking these questions. Of course, the more detail you already give yourself, the better. And you can always throw in your own here or just go ahead and skip. All right, so I'll go with the inline chat panel. So this is actually a good question. We can go fresh because we'll always keep the entry in the sidebar if you ever need to go back. So this is more really for quick research. So we'll do that. And now we'll go ahead, we'll create a plan, markdown file. Right. And so here will be the plan. We'll include a lot of details that are also for development, right? Which is important for the developers you pass it off to, but ultimately it also includes a summary of what's there to do. And if you want to add something, like for example, create a
TLDR that summarizes
TLDR, why we need the feature, and just summarize it.
We can move on to it.
I can tell it to ask me questions if it, it may not know the why because I didn't tell it why. So now it will essentially ask me and then add that to the plan.
So this is if you have developers, also for yourself, but also then for the developer to understand the why, to know if you're just giving it to an agent on GitHub, for example, it will still help, but it will also necessarily be necessary. I think this is more for a person to understand about. What's good for a person is usually also good for the agent, unless it could go off the rails. If it's confusing, we'll see what it does. All right, so yeah, so we'll want to have it as the dashboard. And also why we initially added this section is because people had trouble kind of figuring out what to do as the first thing once they landed there, or after the onboarding is done, then like, okay, how do I get back to the chats? And that's why we added this section. Ultimately, I think the vision will be to make this some sort of agentic experience that just lets you do everything that you can do in the app through there. We're not there yet, but that was the initial idea. So ultimately it's kind of both, right? So we'll say both. All right, and now we have a TLDR that includes why, or what the goal is, and making dashboard self-sufficient. All right, and now it will ask us to start coding, which if you want to try, feel free. But what I want, create a linear ticket in the Gutsy project. All right, I don't necessarily want to code here. I see that it's either for me for later. Like the good thing with the planning is essentially you can plan, you can implement it right away. You can plan, you can pass it, you can save it for later, and then you can save it for later for either yourself or for someone else or for an agent, right? So we're very flexible if we create the plans, and the person with a lot of information, which usually the product manager with the most information does that. But at the same time, we're already giving relevant files. We're already adding all this extra context that normally the product manager can't because they don't know. But I think it's very helpful also for the developer to know where to get started, essentially, especially if they haven't written the feature themselves, right? So now it has created a ticket, and ticket includes why, what, behavior, implementation. So didn't actually create the whole thing. It just has a reference to it. So we need to sharpen the prompt a bit.
Good. Well,
so what I want now is I want actually to include the plan, not just reference a file, because the file is on my computer, like on my machine. So people don't actually have it, but I think I should have just been more clear in the original prompt. See if it did that. So it says updated with the full markdown, tick description, TLDR summary, file change. So this is good. And again, if you needed to have more information up here or wherever that's not code specific, you can do that. You can also create your own shortcuts, skills, commands, and I have other videos for that, to always ask you certain questions, about the why or the impact on the product or other teams that need to be involved, all these kind of things. So it's very, very flexible. But yeah, I think ideally you would run it through command line. But for me, this is a good way to get started. learn ropes, and then, yeah, take it from there.
All right. Let me know if this was useful for you, and we'll see you in the cheers.